because the Muslims gave the freedom of religion and so on. And there's also in the south of Portugal, like Muslim baths. So I'm not sure if this is exclusively Jewish baths, but they are presented as Jewish baths. And it's very funny because this 8200 spy that was studying here, he built this narrative of the anti-Semitism in Coimbra. But as you can see, we are in the middle of downtown. Everybody's passing by here every day. And you have these Jewish baths. They were not attacked in any way. And I think this is part of a kind of a historic revisionism, or try to present Coimbra as a city with a cultural heritage, when at the same time they erase the Muslim heritage, which is completely present around the town.
Hey everybody, this is Laith Marouf from Free Palestine TV, and we are in the city of Coimbra in Portugal. Before we continue with this report, I ask you to press the subscribe and the like button on whatever social media platform you're watching this on, and to go to our website, freepalestine.video, to donate so we can continue bringing you this content. We are here today because we're going to do a tour about the issues of pro-Palestine resistance support in the city, and the stories that our comrade Francisco Ulrike from guilhotinha.info, who is a journalist and an activist rebel in the city, will be telling us more about it. Thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us. As we were going in the city, I can see there's a lot of posters that are pro-Palestinian, but there's also seems like a concerted effort by the Zionists to have this fight or war on the walls of Coimbra. Tell us a little bit about the beginnings of this activism, and how is it this poster war is playing out in the streets?
So basically, with the beginning of the Al-Aqsa flood and the genocide, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, people in the city started to put posters around. And as the time went by, there was more and more pro-resistance posters. And these are the kind of posters that are targeted the most by Zionists, whether Israelis or Portuguese Zionists. We have a lot here too. And so there is a concerted effort to erase any support for the resistance in the city. But for example, this poster here is from an event 2 months ago, and almost 2 months ago, and it's because it's organized by organizations that have a more mild speech and that invite, for example, the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority, of the collaborators in the West Bank. There is no one came here to take them out.
So it's very clear that the Zionists approve of this event. This is why they're not taking it out.
Yes, and you can see plenty of posters from these organizations that are basically calling for peace and having this very superficial approach to Palestine. They cause no problem to them, but then if you put a poster of Nasrallah or Abu Ubaidah or Sinwar, they get completely mad.
So they rip them,
they paint them over, they write messages, they erase the faces and names. In many posters, the poster will remain, but any reference to Gaza will be taken out. So this, I would say, this is kind of part of the effort to erase Palestine, Gaza, and the resistance.
And when they're high up, it seems like they give up.
Yeah, I think they start. These posters I helped started maybe late last year because of this concerted effort. So you start to catch these high posters to make it more difficult to erase.
And there was this poster war started. It's an organized Zionist Israeli campaign to try to fight the sentiment in Coimbra that is pro-Palestinian. There's a story that we heard about a spy, part of the Unit 8200, which is the information warfare unit in the Israeli military, was at the center of this story. Maybe we can start telling our audience about this story.
Okay, so basically we got to know about the presence of this guy, the existence of this guy, and the presence of him in the city about 1 year ago, in July 2025, when a group of Israelis and Portuguese Zionists basically organized an event in a space here in town to center Jewish feelings and to kind of lure the pro-Palestinian, pro-resistance people in the town to participate so they could basically identify who is behind the efforts to put posters and around the city. So they did this, and some of us went to this event, and kind of the opposite happened. Okay, they got to know some of our faces, but we got to know their faces. Of course, they in this event, they try to have these multiple roles of the hardcore Zionist, the liberal Zionist, the Jew that is sympathetic with the Palestinians, but their feelings are hurt. And these same people were, at this same period, trying to infiltrate some of the known public groups, pro-Palestinian groups. Basically, we found first an article about one of these students called Bar Harel, which turned out to be the 8200 spy, because he published this article, I think it was in Jerusalem Post or some Zionist media, complaining about the anti-Semitism in Coimbra. And he exposed his name. So from there, we started to investigate. We found most of the information in his LinkedIn, which is pretty amazing. So he openly states there that he is serving in the IOF, and he served on he also stated, I don't know if in LinkedIn or in other reports, that he served on the IDF. So he left Coimbra after the October 7th to serve on the IDF. And there is one reference from one of his colleagues on his LinkedIn profile saying that Bar is one of the most amazing persons of 8200 unit,
Wow.
which is part of the Aman, which is the intelligence services of the IDF. So we were shocked when we found this. So like this guy is complaining about anti-Semitism and presenting himself as a victim, but he actually is a genocide supporter and a genocide participant. So we got pissed off and we decided to expose him. It was nothing special because the information was already published by him or his colleagues, but we did.
So we're at the beginnings of the downtown old city kind of situation. This church seems to be important.
Yeah, this is actually the church that has the body of the first king of Portugal. It's actually interesting because the nationalists, the far-right nationalists, built this narrative that Portugal was born in the north, in Guimarães, and they conquered all the territory back from the Muslims. But it's much more complex than that. And actually, this king was born here. The independence of Portugal was declared from Coimbra. And this was already an area where Muslims and Jews and Christians lived together during the Muslim period and during the Christian period also.
And there's another location here that is historic, which is Jewish baths, you're saying?
Yeah, they advertise these as Jewish baths. I'm not an archaeologist. I cannot state things with a completely sure that I'm right. But so the Jews were living here during the Muslim period, because the Muslims gave the freedom of religion and so on. And there's also in the south of Portugal, like Muslim baths. So I'm not sure if this is exclusively Jewish baths, but they are presented as Jewish baths. And it's very funny because this 8200 spy that was studying here, he built this narrative of the anti-Semitism in Coimbra. But as you can see, we are in the middle of downtown. Everybody's passing by here every day. And you have these Jewish baths. They were not burned down, firebombed, attacked in any way. I think this is part of a kind of a historic revisionism, or try to present Coimbra as a city with a cultural heritage, when at the same time they erase the Muslim heritage, which is completely present around the town.
Well, it's a mikvah bath, which means that this is where they will convert somebody or wash the woman after her period. This is because they're not allowed to have sex for 7 days after the period, but then she has to do this religious bathing. At least this is what I know from
I had no idea.
From all the occupation of my mind by Jews and their history. But it's nothing, no graffiti on it, no posters, unlike the posters for Palestine that get ripped immediately. As you said, this is safe for them, and clearly they are acting like they own the place with ripping the posters. At the same time, the students that were beginning to be activists in Coimbra and the university, they became victims of targeting. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, in the first year of the genocide, actually in the first months, there was a campaign by students to collect signatures, to call for a student assembly. This is very important assembly here because it's over 20,000 students in the university. This is one of the biggest students associations in the country. And according to their internal regulations, if you have a certain amount of signatures, the Students' Association has to call for one of these assemblies where all the students can participate and vote and propose, make proposals and everything. So there was about 1,700, 1,800 signatures collected, which was way over this required amount. And from the Students' Association, which has been for a long time controlled by the forces connected with the center parties, the center-right and center-left, they blocked any attempt to make this assembly in December 2023. And in the following months, they did some of these students' assemblies where they always try to push the subject to the last point of discussion, so there would be not enough people to discuss. So there was a constant sabotage and silencing of the pro-Palestinian students. And it's actually very interesting that the Jews and the Zionists and the Israel supporters in Coimbra are trying to present themselves as victims, while actually it's the pro-Palestinian community in Coimbra that has been systematically erased from the early months of the genocide in Gaza.
And we saw some students, obviously, in their graduation gowns coming out, and our audience should know that the university in Coimbra is the oldest one in Europe.
The third oldest.
Third oldest, and it is supposed to be a house of knowledge and discussion and debate, which is now losing its independence as an institution of education.
This university has a long history of struggle and of a fight against the fascism. In the last decade of the fascist dictatorship in Portugal, they were very active, and right now, in this first year, there was many attempts. There was a student camp by the time of the global intifada that was also harassed by by Zionists, especially during the night, and the students had to make like turns to protect the camp. But since then, there is almost no activity inside the university context. Of course, there is around the town still.
Well, it's very important for people always, whether students or not, to look back at the history of activism in their town, in their community, and get inspiration. And this is what they're scared of, the Zionists. Not only scared of Palestinians knowing their history and the struggle of, but also anyone in this world that could find inspiration in those movements before them.
It's still a popular name.
So this is the Arco da Almedina, the Arch of Al-Medina, and
Al-Medina, the city, the old city.
Just by the name, we can see that the Muslim legacy, heritage is still alive here. Maybe most people will not realize, but it's clearly a Muslim neighborhood that still exists until today, and it's still called the same name until today. So yeah, maybe returning to Bar Harel, this 8200 spy, it was interesting because, like in guilhotinha.info, we published an article, and this article was kind of viral in social media, and a lot of people were mad that a guy from the IDF was studying in university. He was studying informatics, master and PhD, and there were a lot of angry comments. And this was in July, and by September, we just discovered a couple of months ago, by September last year, he escaped. And he escaped, according to him, after the Israeli and the US embassy contacted him to say that they could not guarantee his safety in the town, that would be better for him to escape.
Well,
and he escaped.
Basically, he was a coward, and he just needed to make another excuse to say he's somehow a victim.
Yes.
And his life is threatened when in reality his activities is threatening the lives of students and activists in the city.
One of the things that Bar, this spy, was claiming last year was that there was flyers around the town saying, "Oh, don't sell bread to this Jew, or this Jew shouldn't have a right to buy bread." But this is actually the only poster that I've seen in the town, or any kind of format flyer or anything. This is the only thing that actually mentions him. Yeah, but we know how Zionists are creating stories to feed their deliriums
Of victimhood.
of victimhood.
Yes.
Yes.
And wow, this is a very beautiful building. Is this right now? It's a church. It seems like, yes.
Yeah, this is the Sevilla, which means the old cathedral, and it's very old, as everybody can see. And before that, it's believed to have been a mosque, and before that, a pagan temple. So it shows how the city evolved over these different periods without losing the roots.
And the Christian rites in this area have developed over time, right?
Yeah. So after the so-called independence of Portugal, the Mozarabic people, so the Christian Arabs that were living here, they were practicing their masses and their rituals according to their own Mozarabic rites. And only much later, I think a couple of centuries after, only then the Roman practices started to be the normal Christian practices in the town. So it stayed out of the influence of the Roman Church, and keeping its more original roots. And there is,
for some of the viewers need to understand, like still till today, the Assyrian Christians, they pray same way as Muslims, they go down and on the ground and so on. It probably was like that before the Catholic Church forced them to change their habits.
Here we can see over there a stone that has some Arabic inscription. There is no consensus about exactly what it says, but the most widely accepted translation of this is states, "I wrote this as an eternal memorial to my suffering. My hand will one day fade away, but the grandeur will remain." And this supposedly would have been written by one of the Mozarabs or Moorish workers or captives.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
The stone workers that were building this.
Yes.
That's actually a tradition that we see all around in the old Arabic world, where the stone workers would leave inscriptions hidden somewhere that's not very clear for others to see as a memory for time. So this is the Qulumriyyah University.
Yeah.
And I can see this graduation.
Yeah, the parts of the clothes of the graduation vests from the students.
So the Zionist campaign to suppress activities in the universities about Palestine, it didn't only attack the students.
Yeah.
It also affected the faculty.
Yeah, there is one professor that is openly pro-Palestinian. I mean, not as a professor, but in her private life. And she has been the latest victim of this campaign of smearing and of supposed anti-Semitism. When a couple of weeks ago, one of these pundits from pro-Israel and pro-Ukraine commentators in the television, in one of the worst television channels we have, he was live, started to speak about her, saying her full name and inventing stories about how anti-Semitic she is, and yeah, and so for now, as it seems, the university has not fell on these kind of campaigns the Zionists do to try to
get the
expel.
professor to be fired or something like that.
Up until now, we have to give credit to this university for not doing it. For not firing her and not falling for this smearing campaign. But we should also mention that this university has several protocols and collaboration programs with Israeli universities. So this was one of the demands of the students when they camped on the end of the first school year of the genocide. And they were systematically ignored by the dean of the university. And from what we know, these protocols are still active.
And there's, of course, a lot of problems with this cooperation between these universities with Israeli universities, because a lot of the things that they produce are used in the genocide and suppression and war machine of the West. That's the only thing that the Israelis are exporting in terms of academic work is means of oppression and suppression of people. This is an amazing view, and the bell of the church is ringing, but this used to be the palace where the Muslim leaders and then the kings Portugal.
This was ordered to be built by Al-Mansur, a figure from the Muslim period on the 11th century. And this was the place where the Arab rulers were living. And after that, the kings, in the beginning of the history of Christian Portugal, they were living here until the capital was moved from here to Lisbon. So this was And now this place is being used, as you were saying, to produce this technology that is now being used on the Palestinians, but in the end, it will be used against all of us. So it's one more reason to keep the fight against Zionism and this mad world that they are creating.
Well, this was a beautiful, tour of Coimbra that Francisco Ulrike, our comrade, gave us a history of the activism that is happening right now and the suppression. You're still watching Free Palestine TV. I'm your host, Laith Marouf. I ask you one more time to press the subscribe button on whatever social media platform you're watching this on, and to go to our website, freepalestine.video, to donate so we can continue bringing you this content. Until we see you next time, we bid you all a world free of imperialism, colonialism, and Zionism.
Free Palestine.